You stand at a bus stop in December, shivering, wrapped in a coat, scarf, and gloves, checking your phone every 30 seconds because the cold feels unbearable after 10 minutes outside. You complain about it. Everyone complains about it. But the real answer to how humans deal with winter is far stranger than a bad commute. Because for most of your species' history, winter wasn't an inconvenience. It was a season that could kill you in a single bad night, and your ancestors faced it for tens of thousands of years with nothing you would recognize as proper clothing, no heated buildings, and no guarantee that spring would find them all still alive. Start with the obvious problem. Your body is built for a tropical climate. No thick fur, no layer of blubber like a seal, thin skin, sweat glands built for cooling, not warming. On paper, you are one of the worst equipped mammals on Earth for surviving freezing temperatures. And yet humans didn't just endure the Ice Age. They spread across some of the coldest, most punishing landscapes the planet has ever produced, including the mammoth steppe of Ice Age Siberia, where winter temperatures regularly dropped far below anything most modern humans will ever personally experience. So how does a nearly hairless, tropically evolved primate end up thriving in conditions that would kill it within hours if unprepared? The archaeologist John Hoffaker has spent decades studying exactly this question, excavating sites across the Russian Arctic and Siberia that reveal how Ice Age humans actually pulled this off. His research points to something deceptively simple. Humans didn't out-evolve the cold. They out-engineered it. You might wonder whether your ancestors simply evolved some hidden biological trick, something that let their bodies handle the cold the way a walrus or an Arctic hare can. It's a reasonable guess, but the evidence doesn't really support it. Studies of modern populations living in extreme cold, from Arctic communities to high-altitude herders, tend to find only modest physiological differences, slightly altered resting metabolism, marginally improved peripheral circulation, nothing close to the dramatic adaptations seen in true cold specialist animals, which means the real explanation has to lie somewhere else entirely, not in the body, in behavior. Take fire first, because fire changes everything. Controlled fire meant more than warmth at night. It meant humans could occupy environments that would otherwise be biologically off-limits. The archaeologist Will Robrooks, who has extensively studied the history of fire use among early humans and Neanderthals, has shown that reliable, controlled fire use became widespread and consistent only relatively late in human prehistory, and its spread closely tracks with humans successfully occupying colder, higher latitude environments. Without dependable fire, deep winter survival in places like Siberia would have been essentially impossible. With it, an entire new set of frozen landscapes suddenly opened up. But fire alone doesn't explain everything. You can build the biggest fire in the world, and if you step 20 feet away from it in a blizzard, you're still in serious trouble. This is where clothing enters the story, and it turns out clothing wasn't just useful. It may have been one of the single most important technological breakthroughs your species ever developed. The researcher Ian Gilligan has spent years studying the evolutionary and archaeological history of clothing, and his work suggests something that might surprise you. Clothing wasn't just a matter of comfort or modesty, it was, quite literally, a survival technology on par with fire itself. Gilligan's research traces how humans likely began with simple draped animal hides, offering basic insulation, and eventually developed fitted, sewn garments, made possible by one small but transformative invention, the eyed needle. Here's the detail that should genuinely surprise you. Bone needles with tiny eyes, fine enough to thread sinew or plant fiber through, start appearing in the archaeological record around the same time humans begin pushing successfully into extremely cold environments. That's not a coincidence. A draped hide keeps you warm. A tightly sewn, fitted garment traps body heat far more efficiently, blocks wind, and can be layered. Gilligan's work suggests that once humans mastered sewn clothing, they effectively created a portable microclimate, a small pocket of livable warmth they could carry with them into landscapes that would otherwise be lethal. You can actually see this technology on a human body, preserved for over 30,000 years. At the site of Sungir in Russia, archaeologists uncovered burials containing thousands of tiny ivory beads arranged in careful lines across the skeletons. Why does that matter? Because the archaeologist Randall White working from earlier excavation data, reconstructed how those beads must have been sewn, row after row, directly onto fitted garments, not draped loosely over the body. The bead patterns trace the outline of trousers, shirts, and even soft footwear. This wasn't a rough hide thrown over the shoulders. It was a tailored, layered, cold-weather outfit, built with the same basic logic as an Arctic parka you might buy today. 30,000 years separate you from that grave, and yet the underlying engineering problem and the solution would look completely familiar to anyone who has ever bought a winter jacket. Now here's the counterintuitive twist. You might assume the coldest environments simply forced humans to invent their best cold weather technology on the spot, out of desperate necessity, but the evidence tells a more layered story. Some of the most sophisticated Ice Age winter survival strategies weren't improvised in a single crisis. They were built up gradually, generation after generation, refined slowly enough that by the time truly brutal winters arrived, humans already had functioning systems in place. Look at the site of Mezhirich, in what is now Ukraine, dated to around 15,000 years ago. There, archaeologists uncovered the remains of dwellings built almost entirely from mammoth bones, arranged deliberately, likely covered with hides, and in some cases showing evidence of hearths positioned inside the structure itself. This wasn't a temporary shelter thrown together in a panic. It was a planned, semi-permanent winter dwelling, engineered specifically to trap heat and block wind, using the largest available building material on the entire steppe, the skeletal remains of an animal humans had learned, over countless generations, to hunt, process, and use almost completely. Think about what that actually required. Predicting where mammoths would be, coordinating a hunt large enough to bring one down, processing the carcass for food, tools, and building material, planning a shelter durable enough to survive an entire brutal season. None of that happens by accident in a single winter. It happens because knowledge, technique, and strategy were passed down, tested, and improved across generations until an entire winter survival system existed before anyone actually needed to use it during the worst of the cold. And it wasn't just one household solving this alone. A single family group couldn't have pulled off a coordinated mammoth hunt, processed that much meat before it spoiled, and built a bone dwelling large enough to shelter everyone through a Siberian winter. This required cooperation across multiple families, shared labor, shared risk, and shared reward. Winter, in other words, didn't just test individual toughness. It tested how well an entire group could organize itself, share knowledge honestly, and trust each other enough to divide dangerous, difficult work. The groups that cooperated well ate through the winter. The ones that didn't often simply didn't make it to spring. There's another piece of this puzzle that rarely gets attention. Food. Winter doesn't just threaten you with cold, it threatens you with starvation because plants die back, rivers freeze, and many animals migrate away or become far harder to track. So what did your ancestors do about that? In many cold environments, they turned the landscape itself into a giant natural freezer. Meat cached in permafrost or simply left in cold, dry conditions could last for months without spoiling. Large kills, like mammoths or bison, weren't just single meals. They were a way of banking calories for a season when almost nothing else was available. Combine that with fire for cooking and warmth, sewn clothing for mobility, and solid shelter for protection, and you have a complete system, one where every piece supports the others, and none of them work particularly well alone. And this is where the deeper pattern reveals itself. Humans didn't survive Ice Age winters primarily through raw physical toughness. Your ancestors weren't biologically hardened against the cold in the way an Arctic fox or a polar bear is. They survived because of accumulated knowledge, transmitted socially, refined over time, and applied collectively. Fire, clothing, shelter design, food storage, hunting strategy. None of these were solved by any single person in any single season. They were solved slowly, by groups, over generations, and inherited by each new generation as an already working system rather than a problem to solve from scratch. That's genuinely strange when you think about it. The reason you exist at all, sitting comfortably in a heated room right now, traces back to thousands of years of accumulated cold weather engineering, refined by people who never lived to see it fully perfected, passed forward anyway, generation after generation, until it became sophisticated enough to support human life on the coldest landmass on Earth. There's something almost humbling in that. None of it was the work of a lone genius solving winter in a single flash of insight. It was thousands of small refinements, a slightly better needle here, a slightly warmer shelter design there, a slightly smarter way to store meat through the leanest months, tested against the harshest possible judge. Whether or not people survived to pass the idea on at all. Every failed strategy simply vanished along with the group that tried it. Only the systems that actually worked got inherited, refined again, and handed forward. In a very real sense, you are looking at thousands of years of trial and error, filtered ruthlessly by survival itself, compressed down into habits so ordinary today that nobody thinks of them as technology at all. Now think about your own relationship with winter today. You still rely on almost the exact same three pillars your Ice Age ancestors depended on. Fire, in the form of heating systems you never have to build or tend yourself. Clothing, mass-produced, endlessly available, requiring zero personal expertise to construct. And shelter, engineered by other people, using materials and techniques refined over centuries that you simply move into and take completely for granted. The only real difference is that you've outsourced almost the entire survival system to specialists you'll never meet, while your Ice Age ancestors had to be the specialists themselves, building, sewing, and constructing their own survival technology from the ground up, together, as an act of collective necessity. So the next time you're standing at that bus stop, complaining about 10 minutes of cold before you step into a heated building, remember what that moment actually represents. You're not weak, and you're not soft. You're simply living at the very end of an unbroken chain of solved problems, an inheritance of fire, clothing, and shelter so effective and so completely normalized that the version of winter that once could kill your ancestors within a single bad night now barely register as an inconvenience worth complaining about at all. The more we learn about the past, the better we understand ourselves. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Phoenix Primeval for more fascinating stories from history, science, and human evolution. Thanks for watching.